Listen closely for a moment, because what I'm about to share might put words to that quiet ache that keeps you up at night. That gap between you and someone that somehow feels louder than any argument. And those patterns of behavior that leave your heart still searching for answers, long after everyone around you has stopped asking. There are moments when a person doesn't tell you what's true using their mouth at all. Instead, they tell you with what they do. There are moments when the heart communicates in a language so quiet that only something deep inside you can pick up on it. And sometimes, someone is trying with everything they have to tell you something important, not through a tidy sentence or a clean, honest confession, but through mixed signals, hesitation, pushing you away, coming back again, pulling emotionally distant one moment and warm the next, going quiet, aching for you, and contradicting themselves constantly. That's where the real truth tends to live. That's the space where Carl Jung would have told you to stop listening to the words themselves and start paying attention to the pattern hiding underneath them. Because people rarely show you who they really are in plain daylight. More often, they reveal it in the shadows, in the pauses between sentences, in the things they can't bring themselves to say, the things they dodge, the things they keep circling back to, and the things they simply can't release. So if you've been holding out for some kind of sign, wondering if they still carry you in their thoughts, asking yourself why they push you away only to return, why they seem so unbothered one minute and then suddenly overwhelmed with feeling the next, why they vanish and then resurface like a sentence they never finished. Pay attention now. The answer might already be right there in front of you. It might not show up in a text message. It might not arrive as an apology they never quite managed to give. It could be buried inside the contradiction itself. What this person is desperately trying to communicate is this. They are not nearly as composed as they look. They are not as detached as they're performing. They are not as unmoved as they'd like you and themselves to believe. Something inside them is stirring, alive, unsettled, still unfinished. Something in them got touched. Something got shaken loose. Something woke up. And when a person can't confront a truth head-on, that truth doesn't just vanish. It starts to seep out sideways, through their actions. It shows up in the hesitating. It shows up in thoughts that keep returning uninvited. It shows up in their dreams. It shows up in that pull to check in on you, to hear updates about your life, to drift back toward you, or to keep their distance while never quite managing to walk away for good. Here's one of the most profound things psychology teaches us. The conscious mind is often a skilled liar, but the unconscious doesn't know how to lie at all. Someone might insist, "I don't care," while every part of their body tells a different story. They might claim, "I'm completely over it," while their thoughts keep drifting back to you in the quiet hours of the night. They might swear, "I don't think about you," while their own emotions give them away in small, unmistakably human ways. They may not be prepared to speak the truth out loud to you, but that doesn't mean the truth isn't there. It just means they're fighting it. And that fight, that resistance, is often the clearest evidence that something real is underneath it. Because think about it. Why would anyone put up a fight against something that meant nothing to them? Why would someone go to such lengths defending their own indifference, explaining away their absence, justifying the space they've put between you, if none of it actually mattered? The answer is straightforward. People guard themselves most intensely against the very emotions that threaten to take away their sense of control. When something reaches into the parts of them they've kept hidden, when it stirs up a fear they've never fully dealt with, when it brings back everything they want and everything they're terrified of losing, they respond the way so many people do. They pull back. They put up walls. They send mixed signals. They test the waters cautiously. They shut down. They convince themselves that staying silent will somehow give them power over a feeling too big for them to control. But silence doesn't make the emotion disappear. It just buries it for a little while. And this may be exactly what your person is trying to say to you, without ever putting it into words. You matter to me more than I'm ready to admit. That's a heavy admission for someone with too much pride. That's a terrifying admission for someone who's been hurt before. And it's the kind of truth that can push a person into behaving in ways that make no sense on the surface. Part of them reaches out toward you. Another part runs in the opposite direction. One side of them remembers the comfort, the closeness, the safety, the warmth you brought into their life. The other side remembers the risk that comes with it, the vulnerability, the fear of being truly seen. And when those two sides crash into each other, the person ends up divided against themselves. They stop being one clear voice and become two competing ones. One voice says, "Go back to them." The other says, "Don't open your heart up like that again." One says, "Tell them how you really feel." The other says, "Stay quiet, stay guarded, stay safe." Living inside that kind of internal tug-of-war is draining, and when someone is caught in it, their outward behavior will almost always leave the people who care about them feeling baffled. But confusion doesn't always mean someone feels nothing. Sometimes it's actually a sign of being completely overwhelmed. Often, the person whose behavior confuses you the most is the one feeling the most, and simply has no idea how to process it. Sit with that for a second, because when someone doesn't have the emotional vocabulary to name what they're feeling, that feeling tends to come out sideways, through inconsistency instead. They get close, then vanish. They seem genuinely interested, then act like they can't be reached. They reach out first, then retreat the moment things start to feel emotionally real. They ask the hard questions, then avoid sticking around for the answers. They give you just enough to keep the connection breathing, but never quite enough to actually make themselves vulnerable. This isn't always cruelty at work. Sometimes it's fear wearing a disguise. Sometimes it's pain putting on a performance. Sometimes it's simply a heart that hasn't yet figured out how to stand out in the open without shaking. Carl Jung understood something important. Whatever we refuse to face within ourselves doesn't just disappear. It grows quietly in the dark. It sits and waits inside the unconscious. It shapes how we act. It steers the choices we make. And it keeps replaying the same emotional story on a loop until we're finally forced to look at it directly. That's why certain people keep circling back to the same person, the same pattern, the same feeling left hanging, the same emotional pull they can't seem to escape. They aren't just returning to a person. They're returning to a wound that hasn't healed. They're returning to the exact spot where the truth is still sitting, waiting for them. What your person might be trying to say is something like, "I'm feeling something I don't know how to hold." That's the confession hiding underneath everything else. Not, "I have nothing to say," but, "I feel far too much, and it unsettles me." That's precisely why the deepest emotions so often hide behind the coldest behavior. What looks like distance might actually be self-protection. What looks like pride might actually be fear. What looks like indifference might actually be attachment that feels too risky to admit out loud. What looks like silence might actually be a mind that's constantly thinking your name and a heart tangled up in conflict it can't voice. And if you've ever loved someone emotionally complicated, you already know this. You know some people aren't difficult because they don't care. They're difficult because they care in a way they can't quite make sense of. They care in a way that scares them. They care in a way that leaves them feeling exposed. They care in a way that forces them to look at parts of themselves they'd rather keep buried. And when love turns into a mirror, not everyone has the courage to keep looking into it for long. That's the essential lesson about projection. People often assume they're reacting to you specifically, but really, they might be reacting to something inside themselves that you've stirred awake. You may have become a mirror for a longing they never resolved. You may have brought back the memory of a closeness they never fully healed from. You may have awakened a desire they can't seem to control. You may be reflecting their own shadow back at them. that hidden corner where fear, need, shame, desire, and tenderness all sit tangled together. And once that mirror shows up, plenty of people do exactly what wounded people tend to do. They step back from what they see. But stepping back doesn't mean the reflection lost its power. It just means it was too real for them to keep staring at. So when your person pulls away, don't jump to the conclusion that they've forgotten you. When they go quiet, don't assume nothing is happening beneath the surface. When they seem distant, don't assume their heart has gone still. Often, it's the exact opposite. The more meaningful a connection is, the more frightening it becomes for someone who hasn't yet built the inner steadiness to face it head-on. Here's the thing. Some people walk away because they genuinely don't care. But plenty walk away because they're overwhelmed. Some leave because they're truly done, but others leave because there's still something unresolved inside themselves. And unresolved people create unresolved connections. Their signals come out mixed because they're mixed up internally. They give you presence and absence practically in the same breath. They make you feel chosen one moment and abandoned the next. They make you feel truly seen, only to feel forgotten shortly after. They leave you questioning your own worth, when really, they're the ones questioning whether they're even capable of loving someone without losing their grip. And here's the part that stings the most. They may not fully grasp how deeply they've impacted you, but they absolutely know that something inside them has shifted too. That's the message they're desperately trying to send, not through polished words or a tidy explanation, but through behavior that keeps repeating itself until you finally see the emotional truth sitting underneath it all. They want closeness, yet closeness terrifies them. They want certainty, yet certainty demands honesty. They want real connection, yet connection demands surrender. They want to be understood, yet being understood means revealing things they've hidden even from themselves. So they stay caught between wanting and guarding, between feeling and fearing, between what they long for and what they believe they can actually survive. And somewhere in that in-between space, you become the question they can't answer. You become the memory they can't shake. You become the feeling they can't fully contain. That's exactly why your absence might end up affecting them more than your presence ever did. Not because you matter less when you're close, but because distance strips away the routines they've been using to avoid feeling anything at all. When you're gone, the unconscious finally gets some room to speak up. The mind runs out of distractions. The heart starts its quiet, private argument with itself. Pieces of you come back to them, a moment, a sentence, a certain look, a feeling, a regret, a possibility, a loss. And little by little, the person who seemed so certain starts to realize they were never as unaffected as they pretended to be. This is simply how the unconscious operates. It doesn't announce itself loudly or dramatically. It comes back as a whisper. It comes back as a thought that just won't stop returning. It comes back as a dream, a memory, a longing that shows up at exactly the wrong moment, a weight sitting in the chest, a sudden pull to check in, to reach out, to know, to revisit what was left behind. The psyche runs on its own schedule, and that schedule doesn't answer to pride. It doesn't answer to ego. It doesn't answer to the false comfort of saying, I'm fine. The psyche only ever asks one thing: what's still unresolved? And in a lot of relationships, what stays unresolved isn't a lack of love at all. It's the fear of what love actually asks of us. Because real love demands honesty. It demands maturity. It demands accountability. It demands showing up fully. It demands the courage to be seen with no mask on. And for certain people, that's more terrifying than losing the whole connection. They'd rather manage their pain from a safe distance than risk the vulnerability that real intimacy requires. They'd rather leave things ambiguous than expose the tender, fragile, unhealed part of who they are. So they hover nearby. They orbit. They come back, then pull away. They reach out, then retreat. And through all of it, they're trying to tell you something they don't yet have the strength to say plainly. I'm not fully in control of what I feel, and it scares me. Here's where a lot of people get love wrong. They assume love is always loud. They assume it's always straightforward. They assume it always says the right thing at the right moment. But sometimes love is a wounded, frightened, half-formed energy trying to survive inside someone who hasn't yet learned how to carry it well. Sometimes love sounds like hesitation. Sometimes it sounds like avoidance. Sometimes it looks like someone who can't stay away, yet can't fully step closer either. Sometimes love hides inside a cycle of coming back again and again, because the heart is searching for its way back to something the mind can't even name. And when your person keeps returning in some form, even if not in person, even if it's only through memory, curiosity, dreams, indirect messages, or emotional echoes, that might be the soul's way of saying the connection didn't end where the ego wanted it to. Don't mistake that unfinished emotional back and forth for a lack of importance. Don't mistake silence for emptiness. Don't mistake distance for disappearance. Don't mistake pride for peace, because people can look completely composed while falling apart on the inside. People can seem cold while feeling something intensely. People can appear indifferent while wrestling with an inner conflict that's actually reshaping how they see themselves. And maybe, just maybe, your person isn't trying to tell you they don't care. Maybe what they're really trying to say is that caring is exactly the problem. Maybe they're trying to tell you that caring stirred up something bigger than they expected. Maybe they're telling you that you reached a part of them that had been sealed off for a long time. Maybe they're telling you that your presence made it impossible to keep pretending they were untouched, unbothered, emotionally out of reach. Because some people build their whole sense of self around control. They convince themselves that staying guarded keeps them safe, that staying detached keeps them strong, that staying distant keeps them protected. But life has a way of testing that mask. A certain person shows up, a certain moment happens, a certain bond takes shape, and suddenly cracks start appearing in the mask. The person feels too much, remembers too much, wants too much, fears too much. And once that old defense mechanism gets threatened, their whole internal system starts to shake. That's why your person might come across as inconsistent. It's not necessarily the shallow kind of game playing people assume. Sometimes it's not manipulation at all. Sometimes it's survival. Sometimes the person is simply trying to survive their own emotions. Sometimes they don't know how to be honest without feeling exposed. Sometimes they don't know how to get close without losing the sense of self they've worked hard to build. Sometimes they don't know how to love without waking up an old wound that insists love always ends in pain. But here's the deeper truth. If a feeling is strong enough to disturb someone's peace, it's strong enough to demand their attention. And if your presence has become something they simply can't ignore, then you're not dealing with something small or insignificant. You're dealing with something that has already entered their inner world and started reshaping it. Jung would say the psyche is always reaching toward wholeness. It seeks integration. It seeks truth. It seeks a merging of the conscious mind with everything unconscious beneath it. And relationships are often the stage where that process plays out. A person doesn't just enter our life as company, they enter as a catalyst. They stir up our wounds, our longings, our fears, our hopes, our shadow selves. They reveal what's already healed in us and what still isn't. They pull to the surface what had been buried. They don't just touch the heart. They touch the unfinished parts of who we are. So when your person struggles to put into words what's happening inside them, it might be because your connection has forced them face to face with their own internal split. The heart wants one thing. Fear wants something else entirely. The past wants protection. The soul wants truth. The ego wants control. That kind of internal conflict can silence even the most confident voice. And inside that silence, the person might be hoping time will resolve what courage hasn't yet been able to face. But time doesn't heal what's hidden, it only brings it into the light. And if you've been waiting long enough, you might already be watching that revelation unfold. You might see it in a lingering glance, a missed chance, a message that arrives too late, an apology delivered in fragments, the way they bring you up indirectly, the way they leave a space open for you even while pretending they've moved on, in the way they can't fully let go of what they can't fully admit. What are they actually trying to tell you? That the bond is still very much alive inside them, that the story isn't nearly as closed as they're pretending it is. They're trying to tell you that your impact went further than they ever expected. They're trying to tell you that some part of them is still listening, still remembering, still reacting to you. They're trying to tell you that their heart never got the final word their ego keeps attempting to write. And maybe the hardest truth of all is this: they might not be ready to act, but they are not unaffected. They might not be ready to speak, but they are not quiet on the inside. They might not be ready to come back the way you're hoping for, but they haven't broken free of that pull either. So what do you do with all of this? You don't chase an illusion. You don't beg for clarity from someone who's committed to staying confused. You don't shrink yourself down to fit inside someone else's fear. You don't mistake emotional chaos for genuine commitment. You don't measure your own worth by how ready someone else happens to be. Instead, you look at the truth for exactly what it is. You accept that some people feel things deeply, but simply don't have the strength to say so out loud. You understand that someone else's internal conflict is not a reflection of your identity. Their struggle to express themselves clearly isn't proof that you never mattered. Their silence doesn't get the final say on your value. Their inconsistency isn't a scorecard for your worthiness of love. Their confusion isn't your failure. That's one of the most liberating truths there is in human relationships. Not everyone who loves you will know how to love you well. Not everyone who feels something will know what to do with it. Not everyone who comes back is actually ready. Not everyone who misses you has the courage to admit it. Not everyone who thinks about you has the discipline to show up with real integrity. And not everyone who's torn apart inside can hand you peace on the outside. So you have to learn to listen past the surface. Listen to the pattern. Listen to what keeps repeating. Listen to what shows up when the words run out. Listen to the emotional residue left behind. Listen to how your own body responds when they cross your mind. Listen for the deeper message sitting underneath all the surface noise. Because sometimes the soul understands before the mind catches up. Sometimes your own sense of peace recognizes someone else's instability long before your hope is willing to release its grip. Sometimes your intuition picks up on what their mouth refuses to say. And sometimes the most loving move you can make isn't forcing a confession out of them, but simply acknowledging the truth that's already speaking in fragments all around you. What your person is desperately trying to tell you is this: they were changed by you. They were stirred. They were shaken loose. They were confronted with something. They were exposed. They were woken up to a part of themselves they may have spent years avoiding entirely. And because of that, your presence now lives somewhere deeper than an ordinary memory. It's no longer just about affection. It's no longer just about attraction. It's no longer just about missing a person. It's about the encounter they had with themselves, made possible only through their encounter with you. That's why certain people never leave us the simple way we expect them to. They stay behind, not only in the heart, but woven into the architecture of the psyche itself. They become part of our internal landscape, a reference point, a wound, a lesson, a mirror. And a mirror can be loved, feared, rejected, and still remain exactly what it is: a mirror. Once someone has truly seen themselves reflected clearly through another person, they can never fully go back to not knowing what they felt. So if there's one final truth they're trying to communicate through all of this, let it be this. What's real doesn't disappear just because it was hard to put into words. What's meaningful keeps pressing against the surface until it's either faced honestly or transformed into something else. What's hidden keeps searching for a way to express itself, and what remains unresolved keeps asking, quietly, for attention. That's why silence is never truly neutral. That's why distance doesn't always mean what it appears to mean. That's why someone's actions can say far more than their words ever could. Because the heart never actually stops communicating. The only real question is whether anyone is brave enough to listen. And maybe your person, in their own flawed, frightened, very human way, is trying to say that they're not done with the feeling. Not done with what it meant. Not done with the battle happening inside them. Not done with the memory of you, the mark you left, the emotional weight of everything you stirred awake in them. Even if they never managed to say it outright, you now understand the deeper pattern at work here. You understand that love doesn't always arrive wrapped in certainty. Truth doesn't always arrive as a clean confession. Longing doesn't always show up as action. Sometimes the message arrives disguised as confusion, sometimes as retreat, sometimes as a sudden return, sometimes as a silence that somehow never stops speaking. And once you understand that, you stop waiting blindly for the right words to save you from what the behavior has already told you. You stand in your own clarity. You see things as they are. You let the truth be enough, because the truth was already there all along, in the pattern, in the hesitation, in the pull that neither of you can fully deny, in the emotional echo that lingers long after the conversation ends, in the way they return to your thoughts just as often as you return to theirs. And here is the truth, plain and simple. Your person is desperately trying to tell you that what they feel is real, that what they fear is real, and that what they can't bring themselves to say might be the most important part of the whole story. So don't ignore the silence. Don't brush off the contradiction. Don't overlook the unconscious language the heart speaks in. Because sometimes when a person can't say, "I need you," they say it instead through every unresolved return. Sometimes when they can't say, "You matter to me," they say it through every moment of emotional hesitation. Sometimes when they can't say, "I'm afraid of what this means," they say it by vanishing at the exact moment the connection starts to feel real. And sometimes when someone can't say, "I'm not over you," they end up spending months proving it in the only language they know how to speak. The soul always leaves clues behind. The heart always leaves traces. The unconscious always finds its way to the surface eventually. Your job was never to force the truth out of anyone. Your job is simply to recognize that truth when it shows up dressed as silence, as distance, as longing, as contradiction. That's the message. That's the pattern. That's what they've been desperately trying to tell you all along. And once you finally hear it, you'll never listen to emotional silence the same way again.